So, yeah, so it'd be like Santa Cruz style is...
Yeah.
Like a subsect of Northern California skating. They're gonna be able to skate transition. They're gonna skate fast. They're gonna grind things without waxing them. At the core, he's a Santa Cruz person, so he has that all in him. It's gonna be gnarly.
Yeah, I think that one of the things to me that makes this whole story worth telling is the story of my mom and my family before I was even born.
Just holler if you need me for anything. I'll just be down here on this bench.
All right, sweetie.
Good luck, Mama. Love you.
I love you more. I love that kid. That is like, you know, the checklist of sons, really, really.
Can you tell me, how did you end up in Santa Cruz?
It's kind of a long story. I came from a very tumultuous background in New York, and I just needed to get out. We had to send me somewhere. So they flipped a coin, and we had a choice between sending me to a kibbutz in Israel or sending me to Texas with my Aunt Pearl's friend Dorothy. And I think kibbutz won, but Texas was cheaper, so I wound up going to Houston, Texas. Some friends of mine from New York were passing through, and they literally called me, and they said, "We're going to Mexico. Do you want to come?" And I said, "Sure." And I had a duffel bag, so I crammed it through with whatever I could, took whatever money I had, grabbed my dog, and hitchhiked my way down to the Mexican border, and wound up living in Mexico for 21 years. Santa Cruz happened very accidentally because I was leaving, at that time, it was probably about the 4th or 5th time I was leaving Emmanuel's dad, and he's a great guy, but he was also really violent. I met an American woman with a son. So we kind of talked and commiserated, and she said, if you ever decide to leave this guy and you want to come to California, I'll give you my address and blah, blah, blah. And so we hitchhiked our way up the coast. And I basically came up homeless via shelters with 3 kids. I finally got to downtown Santa Cruz, and I called this woman, and she said, "Oh, I don't know if that's such a good idea." Now, we'd been communicating the whole way, right? Yeah. So it turns out that the house that she told me she lived in was the little house behind the big house, and the little house was a trailer. There was absolutely no room for us. And so we had nowhere to go, and she said, "But I have a place for you." So she took us to one of those old 39 Chevy milk vans painted bright yellow. She gave me a blanket, a couple of oranges, jug of water, a pillow, and she said, "Lock yourself in and you'll be fine." So we spent our first night in Santa Cruz, me and 3 kids, in a truck.
I think that my mom is a testament to what the power of being a parent is. We are a product of her. It's a testament as to how much a parent's love for their kids will help them to persevere.
And then at some point, Emmanuel's dad and I got back together. And so Emmanuel began in that little trailer, and then from there, we moved to a kind of a historic Christian site, which used to be called The Land.
But this is it. This is what used to be called The Land. And it was basically like a hippie kind of Christian commune.
It was a total commune. It had 4 or 5 huge, beautiful Victorians. I mean, we were kind of hippy-dippy. This was a home birth. He was breeched. He was 9.5 pounds. There were 20 people there eating the cheesecake that I baked for myself, this big blueberry cheesecake, and people, you see them walking in on the video as, "Oh, how are oh, how's it going over there? Oh, look, it's crowning. I haven't seen you in ages. You know, it was like this big social event.
That's Rhea, no? Yeah, that's what. Come on, everybody dance. No, you guys. 9.5. Oh. 9.5.
This was all just kind of like grassy knoll leading up to the property. And then I'm pretty sure up in here was where all the houses and the actual farm was. Somewhere in there, my placenta's buried. I guess my parents, you know, in like the hippie tradition of things, they wanted to like mark the land where I was born. So somewhere in there, my placenta's buried, which is pretty rad.
Oh, and I had to have the kids there, right? So this was going to be this big, this big spiritual moment. And they're standing there, Danny, Brenda, and Isaiah, and out pops the baby, and I look over to see their little faces, and they're like,
As a youngster, I'll say what he was like as it related to us and skateboarding. You know, I skated back then. I would not call myself a skater by any means, but I skated, you know, and I was okay. And me and my friends would go skating, and he was the type of kid that he'd want to follow us, you know. He would want to hang. He was basically the annoying little brother. He wanted to keep up with us, and I think that's part of what made him good is like, you know, I would tell him, beat it, you're too slow, go home. He was persistent, and yeah, little by little, you know, obviously he could keep up with us. And
That's rad.
Skateboarding didn't happen for me until I was probably closer to 8 or 9 years old. I was aware, I knew what a skateboard was because my brother Danny actually had a skateboard at one point in time. And then as I got older and went into 4th, 5th grade, I started to see kids in class with them and started to see kids around, you know, just the neighborhood pushing around on them. And I became familiar because of the kids I met at school.
I think that we met for the first time on the soccer field. It was like the first practice for our soccer team. When I saw him, I could tell he had the fiery kind of competitive energy, you know, but he was so small. I was like, who is this guy, you know? And he's always like looking at you a certain way. And
What was he like as a kid?
he wasn't terribly interested in school. He was very social. He was a fabulous athlete. He said he was going to be a professional athlete. And you know, every kid who wants to be one doesn't get to be one, but we all knew that he was going to do it. We thought it was going to be soccer. He played really, really hard for several years. He got to play in a European youth tournament. And that's when he came home and he said, it's going to be skateboarding. And I said, over my friggin' dead body.
You got it, E-Man?
It just so happened that one of these friends I had made at school, his name was Roy Forbes, and he had an old board. You know, I asked him if there's any way that he would be willing to sell that. Somehow in our, 4th, 5th grade mind, we devised a figure that seemed fair. I vaguely remember the figure being somewhere around like $32, $34. And so that was it. I was like, I'm gonna make this money, I'm gonna save this money, and I'm gonna buy that board. My parents never gave us allowance. We could earn money though, we could earn allowance. And so I would get 10 cents for every pair of socks I folded. And when you have a family of 6, I mean, that would add up. And I would get 10 cents for every rock I found in the big 10-pound bags of beans my mom would buy. That's how I saved up to buy my first skateboard. And so I remember the night that we went over to make the deal, it was pissing rain. I didn't have anywhere to put all this collected like change and wadded up dollars and stuff. So I found a Ziploc bag and threw it all in there, stuffed it all in there. Got the money, and then he handed me the board and it was mine. I later got in the car, like my new board, and oh my gosh, I've got my own skateboard. I'm showing up to school with this tomorrow.
Right here, this parking lot. This is where my first ollie happened. I had been trying to learn to ollie for months. I was doing the old like, I got off the ground, right? They all got off the ground, right? And my brother would be like, nah, that's not an ollie, that's not an ollie, One night I was doing that and all of a sudden, I'm like, no. And I start yelling for my brother, Isaiah, Isaiah. And he finally comes to the window. He's like, what is it? I'm like, I did an ollie.
And instead of like giving him the satisfaction of a compliment, I was like, cool, let's see if you can do it rolling now, you know?
I was like, damn, that sounds hard, but there was this little piece of sidewalk right here. This used to actually have concrete over it, and that was the first zone that I think I learned to ollie up. That was probably the first curb. It was like a little micro curb.
So yeah, first off, just like how did you meet EMAN?
So I was just talking to him about that. I remember the first time that we met, little kid rolls up, bleach blonde hair, and he had a skateboard with bright neon green grip tape. We were probably like 8 or 9 or 10 or something like that. Me and a couple other buddies had already like just started skating recently, like a few months or whatever. That's just kind of how we met, like with the skateboard in hand, and then we just started working on it together, you know what I mean?
You know, by 6th grade, we were pretty tight, and we were pretty joined at the hip as far as our friendship went and as far as our love for skateboarding went. And because of the overall skate scene in Santa Cruz being so rough, my brother had those guys to go off of, the Nick Fosters, the Corey Chryslers, the Andy Roys, and we had my brother to go off of. And so it was you know, a no-brainer that eventually my crew would end up trying to you know, emulate the same things, if not outdo it. You know, every generation wants to outdo the next. So whatever they were doing that was bad or gnarly, like we wanted to one-up it.
So Santa Cruz is a surf town, right? Because it's like living on an island. It's easy to get sucked back into whatever happenings here in town. And it even used to be like that. The whole neighborhood used to be called the Flats around the boardwalk, and that was like, that's where I knew some skaters went and got heroin. That was a place you didn't just go to in the middle of the night, or definitely were like watching your back.
By 8th grade, I was basically like left with the tough decision as to continue on like being a part of this group of friends, or just go down the dark, negative path with no foreseen future.
I'm one of those people. Like, I started drinking a lot, right? Like in high school, started going to parties. I was just bored. I didn't have anything else to do, and so I started this other career with drugs and alcohol, and it took me into some really dark places, you know, in and out of jail and in and out of rehabs, and I did that for 8, 9, 10 years.
You got a small gut to handle that.
Weed and alcohol got introduced to us around 7th and 8th grade.
I think the first time he ever saw weed was me smoking weed with the gangsters back behind the buildings in our neighborhood. And then, you know, drinking, I think probably one of the first times he drank was with me and my friends. And we're talking at like 11 or 12 years old.
By freshman year in high school, some of my friends were full-blown alcoholics. That was pretty eye-opening at that age. They went from dabbling to being full-blown addicts by freshman year in high school. That ended up translating from weed and alcohol to coke and speed and meth and heroin. And by sophomore year, junior year in high school, some of those friends were completely hooked on meth or heroin, or just, you know, and I couldn't have anything to do with them. And it was a really heartbreaking moment in my life, because even at that young age, I had to make the tough decision of walking away from some of my best friends. And now, you know, there's probably a handful of them that are dead. And then there's some that are still struggling with their addictions all these years later. They haven't kicked it, but they're still, you know.
I think there was a point where it went from like having fun, I'm pro, living the rock star life now, to now like this is becoming concerning, yeah. Like when stuff like that started happening more often, then I think you start getting more concerned. Like this is not just like getting a little too crazy when you're partying, this is actually like a problem, you know?
Yeah, he got drunk, did some stupid shit, and then didn't want to call his mom. Yeah, he called my mom, and it was late. She saw that he needed help just getting out of jail. And so she helped him do that, but she also probably gave him an earful.
I get a phone call, it's about 2 o'clock in the morning, and hello, is this Mrs. Guzman? And I said, it is. This is Officer so-and-so. And I said, oh, well, we have your son here. I said, which one? And he said, his name is Johnny. And I said, I don't have a son named Johnny. What does he look like? Well, he doesn't look really good, ma'am. He's leaning up against a light post and his pants are down around his ankles and his eyes are closed, but he says his name is Johnny. I said, tell him to open his eyes. If they're green, his name is Emmanuel. He comes back and he said, yes, ma'am, it's him. I said, keep him up against the post. I'll be right there.
I remember him calling me from Brooklyn, New York, 3 in the morning, stranded in Brooklyn in a laundromat in the hood. I think he called just to be safe, stay on the phone, basically, because he didn't know where the heck he was or how to get back to where he was, and he was hammered.
So what happened with the Caymans?
So apparently he was hammered and celebrating his 21st birthday. I guess he accidentally knocked into a mirror on a van that belonged to this 9x9 bouncer. So the bouncer looks at this scrawny little big mouth kid. It's like, he does a pokey with you. And he was in the same cell as these 2 Jamaicans who had just macheted to death a couple of tourists.
I mean, in Santa Cruz, it is really easy to slip into that. The drugs are just so easy to get, and it seems like everybody's just doing something, you know? There's quite a lot of us that did that. Finally got my head out of my ass and got everything together, and you know, I'm coming up on 13 years clean.
The place that we're going to that I grew up in 35 years ago plus, my mom just moved back to about 6 months ago, and it's cleaned up a lot, and the places are a lot nicer. I mean, when we moved out of there, we were all very stoked to be getting out of there. For good reason. It was pretty gnarly back then.
This is cool. This is nice now.
This is all new. Yeah, man, this was a pretty cool little zone. You could always like come play out here, hear somebody's mom screaming at them at any given hour. And then this is the office, laundromat. It's kind of circle. It's like the little community center right here. See, these signs didn't exist when I lived here. We're the reason why they exist. Funny stories that come to mind. So back in the day, like nobody in here really skateboarded except for my older brothers and maybe like another kid or 2, and then myself. On a couple occasions, I had friends that would try to come visit and skate here with me. People jacked their boards like as soon as they came in here, you know? And then I'd have to go door to door, just knocking on like, who could it have been? Like, who could have jacked their board? And I would find their boards and I'd get them back to them, but they wouldn't want to come back here anymore after that usually. And then one year, I can't remember exactly when, it became a little bit like kind of sketchy to be out here skating because some rival gang had come and done a drive-by. I think like some of these houses got hit. I think this wall was sprayed up pretty good.
I mean, it was as hood as Santa Cruz got. People from outside the neighborhood were scared to come in there. My white friends, a lot of their parents wouldn't let them come over, or they would drop them off outside the neighborhood out front, and then I'd walk out to meet them and walk in with them. Ordering pizza, we had to meet the pizza guy across the street.
So my dad was a super dedicated martial artist, and he mowed this field, but he would also run. He would run the field, and he would do like 5 miles every day. And then we had a heavy bag up here, and he would come and stretch and hit the bag, and he was nuts. Everybody thought that our dad was like the Mexican Bruce Lee growing up.
Living with my dad was tough. He was a tough guy to please. I think I gave that same air with my brother, but with my dad, I think what my brother experienced more than that was just having my dad not be present.
He and my mom were together until I was about 12 years old. My dad being 9 years younger than my mom, when he met her, she already had a kid. I think that life hit him pretty hard and fast, and I think that he was forced to grow up and accept all this responsibility at a young age. I can imagine now as a parent that was probably really hard.
I think it's been a huge progression and internal growth for him over the years. When I first met Emmanuel, there was a lot of anger inside him about his relationship with his father. But it felt like in those first couple of years, he really started to look at the relationship with his dad a little bit differently. Instead of just saying like, F you weren't there for me, it was more like, okay, like maybe together we can grow something better.
He was my dad, he was my hero. I thought he was the most badass person on the planet. looking back also and really, being honest with myself from a grown-up perspective, he wasn't the most involved parent. Yeah, when my parents divorced and my dad left, that was a really hard time.
How did he deal with his father leaving? Not real well for a while. I think he became very resentful for a while. He was definitely drinking more than he needed to.
Now as an adult, I can understand the actual dynamic and why I've probably felt a lot of the abandonment issues and things that I have. It's not that he wasn't around at all, it's that in the time that he was around, we never really developed a super close relationship. And then at the time he did leave, around 12 years old, it was a really crucial point in my life.
So what were your first impressions or first memories of EMAN?
When I got here in '95 is when he started coming around a little bit. I think he was about 10 years old, but definitely already standing out, amongst all the kids. His attitude, the fact that he was really good with other kids and people, and of course his abilities, his skateboarding abilities.
That company that I mentioned that was on my first skateboard, Live Oak Skateboards, one of my brother's friends, Matt Parks, was sponsored by them when they were in high school. And that was the first time I had ever heard of sponsorship. I didn't know what being sponsored meant on any level, let alone in skateboarding. I probably asked him one day, what's it like being sponsored? What does that mean? And his answer was, see this board I'm riding? I get that for free. And to me, who was probably still trying to figure out, when I ride this thing to the ground, how am I gonna afford another one, And there was the answer. That was, boom, dude. That was the moment that I think I realized that that's I think what I want to do.
He started working with Bill. Bill was the beginning of the beginning. From the time, I love you, Bill, mwah! I love you, and they got you on camera. We would go into Bill's Wheels when Emmanuel was real little, and of course Emmanuel was in awe of, Bill's Wheels, that's Bill. Bill would always come up with a pair of shoes that were just marked down, that just happened to be Emmanuel's size, in a really nice shoe that I couldn't afford. It was absolutely wonderful.
I did want to get sponsored eventually, but again, I didn't know anything about it or how. I finally got to the point of approaching a friend again, and he rode for Bill's Wheels. Zach, being the friend he was, he approached Bill. He said, hey, I got this young kid. He really wants to ride for you. Bill said, well, I'll tell you what, we have a demo coming up at SoCal Elementary. We're gonna be skating for some first and second graders. I'll see how you interact with everybody. I'll see how your skating holds up, and we'll talk from there. And so that's what I did, man. I showed up to that demo, skated my heart out. And after that demo, Bill came up to me and he said, hey, great job out there. You're gonna be on our B team. As a B team rider, you got a fat discount, but it wasn't totally free yet. That was it. That was the moment everything clicked, and I knew that I had found my calling. Yeah.
And by the age of probably 12 or so, we put him on our team. And back in those days, we were doing lots of demos. He was part of that, and always a standout.
I knew that I was gonna have to work my ass off to get on the A team because I had seen those dudes skate, and so that's what I did. I showed up to every demo I was asked to skate. I submitted photos whenever Bill needed photos. I went from the B team to the A team, which was huge. That went from my mom getting a discount on clothes and shoes. And then when I made the A team and I was actually getting a free board a month, and my mom was done buying me skateboards from that moment on, And it was eye-opening to me that there was actual progression to be had that was not necessarily yet coming across monetarily, but I was being given incentives and I was being given actual tangible things that I could hold as a result of my hard work and be like, whoa, I'm getting somewhere, I'm getting somewhere, I'm getting somewhere.
about to start right now. Even if I like do an ollie and leave, I don't think I've ever rolled in here without my board. This is technically called Jose Avenue Park. We've always called it the Bedpan. Our friend Corey dubbed it that after realizing that from an aerial view it actually looks like a hospital-issued bedpan. And it's our famous, most stomped grounds, probably in Santa Cruz. I was probably like 14 when I decided to put together a sponsor me video. At that time, it was way more of a task to compile footage and to just have access to that footage than it is nowadays. My mom, she knew an older woman in the area that had that equipment, and I believe that she charged around 15 bucks an hour. So I saved up probably like 40, 50 bucks. I reached out to her and asked if I could hire her to help put this sponsor me video together. And we sat in this dark, dingy little room of hers and basically sat and edited my sponsor me video together for probably 3 hours straight. It was a no-brainer that I would want to ride for this company I had seen around and heard of called Santa Cruz, because I lived in Santa Cruz and I couldn't think of another more meaningful connection for somebody like myself to represent and to like build a legacy with than the hometown company of.
I don't know, for me, like if I got to where he was at, I would want to ride for, I mean, we're from Santa Cruz, like, you know, I mean, it's just cool to be able to say you're from Santa Cruz and ride for Santa Cruz. You know?
The next daunting task was, now that I had the sponsor me video made, was how to get it into the right hands at NHS. My friend Keith Squires, he used to shrink wrap all the boards at NHS. I was telling him about this whole idea of, you know, he told me, yeah, of course I can facilitate. I see that team manager every single day. I remember that morning, I gave him this VHS tape, trust it with your life, you know. And I remember that was just one of those days that felt like it went on, it just dragged out forever. I got home from school and was sitting by the phone. I was waiting for him to get off of work. Lo and behold, I mean, I'm sitting there waiting by the phone and it rings and I pick it up. Oh, hi, my name's Matt Sharkey. I work over at Santa Cruz Skateboards, and your friend Keith, who works here, brought us your sponsor me video earlier, and man, we really liked what we saw. We liked the song, we liked the skating. We hear you're local, like we'd love to start flowing you boards. I was so high on cloud nine from that phone call, and he had told me, you know, about this much of what he was offering as far as we want to start flowing you boards. I was like, awesome, man, I'm getting free boards from Santa Cruz, no way, that's all I heard. And so I lived pretty close to NHS at the time, so I skate to NHS and I'm kind of poking my head around, I'm not seeing anybody, but I see all the skateboards and just grab a stack of boards. I just literally grab like 5, 6 boards and start heading out, just grin across my face, ear to ear. And as I'm walking out of the parking lot, I just hear this voice like, hey, what are you doing? Get over here.
And I'm sure he told you about the time that I stopped him because he had some product.
And I started explaining myself. Oh no, it's all good, man. Like, me and Matt Sharkey, we talked about an hour ago. He told me, come get some boards.
I had known that, yeah, he's meant to get product, but I was like, nah, that's not how we do it here, man. You gotta get this, we gotta write this up.
And I was so embarrassed. Oh man.
I just didn't know the process. He just walked through the warehouse and started grabbing stuff, but I think that might have been the first time I met him.
So from the flow gig, I was on that for a little while. I was proving myself. I was just kind of going through the rigors of trying to, you know, show that I was dedicated enough, professional enough to be put on the full roster, be considered like one of the AMs. That was a little bit of a task, and I had to go out and I had to really skate and produce more than what I thought the pros were doing at the time. That's what it required back then was getting yourself published in magazines, submitting photos, just really hustling. And so yeah, it was around 2003 or 4 that I got officially put on, had my first ad. It was official. I was no longer Flo, I was like an amateur. My first actual trip as a Santa Cruz rider was up to Sacramento and Woodland. That was my first official trip. The trip to Vancouver with Holly was my first international trip.
My name is Holly Anderson and I'm the sales director for NHS. So I was the Santa Cruz Snowboards team manager. We were on a trip with the Santa Cruz skate and snow team from Santa Cruz all the way up to Whistler.
So we get to this skate shop in Redding. I can't remember, it was inside of a mall. We're unloading the back of the van to get to our boards, and I'm looking for my board and I'm looking for my board, and I realized that I left my board in Santa Cruz. First international trip, you know, another proving moment to show that I can be responsible and professional and all these things, off to a terrible start. We finally made it to Canada. I had never been given per diem, so I get 500 bucks in my hand, spending cash. But I'm like, what can I spend this on? I know what I'm gonna spend it on, an ounce of weed. And then realized real soon that I was gonna run out of money.
So as anyone knows that when you're traveling to Canada, they're pretty strict about bringing anything that's not legal in Canada at the time with you, including marijuana. So I reminded everyone, make sure you guys get rid of anything that you might have.
I had forgotten to take this empty film canister out of my 20 compartment indie bag, and the film canister didn't have anything in it but what they called residue. The residue was enough for those dogs to sniff it out in the bottom of a pile of bags.
And basically it was just like full shakedown of the whole van. Like they took us all out, we had to go in this back room, and they just like went through the whole van. We were stuck there at the Border Patrol for hours. And somehow Emmanuel like talked his way out of it.
Fortunately, although the bag was mine, the narcotics were not, and they let us go, but I was pretty sure that was the last trip I was gonna be going on.
I think he pretty much learned quite a bit of lessons on that trip. You know, you gotta learn the ropes. Like, he probably never forgot his board again, and probably never brought weed to Canada again after that.
But EMAN was always very apologetic and he learned.
EMAN always seemed to know the importance of like the moment or the time. I can think of one time at a trade show? Yeah, a trade show where he destroyed the hotel room. And I think he paid for all the damage he did.
Every penny. I don't know if they'd have kept him around if he hadn't. That's how it's always been with me. There's always been an apology. There's always been a moment where it's like, yeah, I blew it. Yeah, you did. But now where do you go? He wants that to be part of his reputation because your reputation is your legacy.
As well as I knew that the next step after becoming an AM is just to become a pro. Before I really had the opportunity to do anything monumental with Santa Cruz, I had started writing for Krux around the same time. So the first video that I filmed for NHS was actually a Krux video part, and that was in Blowing Out.
So I think a hometown hero, they'll know that they're good and accept getting to the level, like, I'm the best at my high school. They only see the small pond that they're in. Whereas somebody who's got more than that is already like, well, you know, we're so close to San Jose and San Francisco. If you're paying attention, you want to start like competing with the people that are in those magazines. And I saw that from him pretty early on. Since I ran Krux and he was in town, I really wanted him on Krux, and he rode for Krux. And
After the Krux blown out video, I think the next video that we started working on, next video part we started working on was Guarte. Guarte was the defining part after the blown out part that led to me turning pro.
So many guys in this town that probably they're good enough to be pro. They just never go after it, or they fall into the wrong stuff or whatever. He didn't, you know, in spite of whatever he might have had to overcome. But I think he had the right makeup overall, right? The right determination, the right everything, so.
I really didn't think that there was much of a career progression. I just kind of figured I would leave it up to maybe he was going to catch the tail of the comet just as it was starting to rise. And in some respects, that's what happened. He broke into skateboarding at a good time. Who do you tell? Oh, my son skateboards for me. Ah! Your son does what for a what? And now it turns out that I can say your son might be the doctor and your son might be the lawyer, but my son is an action figure.
EMAN does span across multiple eras. He started and got into the industry side of it at such a young age. He came in, was like, damn AM shit, and then all of a sudden he's like pro level with like Rally and all these dudes. And then Rally and those guys started becoming like these more like legends, skate legends. EMAN and those eras still like keep going.
So Let's Do This was huge for me in the regard that I went from being like the biggest Transworld fan nerd to having a video part in there, not taking away from any other video parts I've ever filmed. That is the biggest video part I've ever filmed.
I mean, he's done so much shit even before I knew him, and when I knew him, on trips with him, like everything he goes for is just go for broke. It's never really any type of like filler or safe shit. He doesn't really do that. It's probably everyone's favorite photos. The cover, his Thrasher cover, dude. It's Back Smith.
E-Man was definitely at the kind of the peak of at least his visibility, not necessarily his skateboarding, when we got the Thrasher cover, December 2009. It was a prideful moment for us to have him achieve that. We're super stoked for him, obviously, but for us to have someone on our wood program get the cover of Thrasher, it was really cool to see.
Big E-Man fan. So for me, his Transworld cover, where he's olling into the seawall in Santa Cruz, that's like insane.
And even though, like I was saying, you know, local law could see you down there having a keg or raging, depending on the tide, like they couldn't really get to you, so they just have to wait. We'd have huge bonfires down here. We'd bury kegs in the sand. And then it was always a dream of mine from the time I first laid eyes on this beach and this wall, like, man, what if you could ollie into this wall? That'd be so sick. And 15 years later, we made it happen. So I think the only reason that it actually happened was because we were doing Skate and Create. I knew that if we were actually going to consider this as like something that we skated, that the ollie-in was going to have to happen. And
that was the cover, right?
And that was the freaking cover. And when we went down to Transworld for the reveal kind of the winners, man, seeing that thing like unveiled with that ollie on the cover, nobody will ever know how significant that was to me.
E-Man is like, it is raw, uncut skateboarder. He comes from a time that he filmed with his friends on like mom's VHS camera, cut that thing up, walked in there, dropped off the tape. And I think that that's kind of like my biggest attraction to his skating, is the will to succeed, you know? Even if the odds are like against you.
It's ridiculous, actually, like just the fact that he's been in the game for as long as he has, and he's still like progressing on his own level, and also like still putting out video parts and photos and just tricks that are amazing to this day.
This is your like guy, you know? I'm dad, I'm a husband, I'm a fucking ripper, like this is the best. To me, is like the definition of like the working class hero skateboarder.
It's always been a really good fit. Loyalty on both ends. It's a success story that we always wanted to keep going. You know, we have 160 people here, most of which live in Santa Cruz or are from here. And so for them to see a homegrown Emmanuel Guzman still with the company. I think there's this loyalty and pride.
At the core, he's a Santa Cruz person, so he has that all in him. As far as pros from Santa Cruz, there haven't been that many. Corey Chrysler, think of Jaya, think of Justin Strubing, EMAN, Raven, Cody Chapman, and myself. So to live in Santa Cruz, stay in Santa Cruz, ride for Santa Cruz, and be pro for Santa Cruz, the brand, that's just EMAN.
No, he's definitely very loyal to his companies that he skates for. You know, he was always good to throw a Bills hat on or a shirt and do all that and represent us.
Honestly, we have been through so much together, and the one thing that we have shown one another is commitment and like loyalty. As loyal as I've been to NHS and to Santa Cruz and NHS have been completely 100% as loyal back to me.
One of the things I love about him is his loyalty. He doesn't let everyone in, but once you get into EMAN, like in his little world, he will not ever let go. And that's like one of the most beautiful qualities of him.
I've really just dedicated and committed my life to that brand. It's been the best thing I've ever done for myself in my life. The time spent there and the influence that they've had will benefit me and affect me forever.
He's an amazing father. I mean, he is. He's so cautious. He's helicopter dad. He's finally lightening up a little bit, and Cairo is fantastic.
I think him and Natalie are more hands-on, but I think he is more cautious. It's funny. He's a pro skater, and I feel like he's more cautious than Cairo than I am with my daughter. Like,
If I could dream up a father for my child, it is like Emmanuel is that times 10. He really is the best father. I think people always think because he's a crazy ass skateboarder that he's just gonna be like irresponsible and a nutball as a dad, and he's actually the opposite. He's actually a little bit helicoptery. We all tease him for it. And he's just super hands-on and like takes him out fishing, takes him skating. But yeah, he's just super fun, super responsible, like all the things that probably people didn't expect him to be, he is. Hey, Cairo. Buddy, it's your turn. So what they got? It's your turn, buddy. Right here?
Tell me when I'm ready.
Okay. You tell me when you're ready.
I'm ready now.
You're ready? Okay. What do you think of your dad? Like, what does your dad do?
He plays WrestleMania with me. I like to play with him. Okay?
Is he a good dad?
My dad was competing in Taekwondo at a tournament in like LA, I think, and he had sustained a gnarly injury during the fight. Was all we really knew was that he had broken a rib and it was super bad and it was like poking out of the side, and that he had a 5-hour drive and was just still in his gi. He couldn't even take his gi off, you know? Finally, you know, whatever time it was, we see a car pull up and we see my dad get out and he's holding his side, and he looked like he was in excruciating pain, like, but he's holding his side, you know, and he comes around the side of the car and he grabs something else, and it's this huge trophy. Like, the thing's almost as tall as he is. And we're so excited, and we're up in the window, and, you know, Poppy, oh, he's back. And, you know, and he looks up and he's like, oh, the kids are still awake, and then holds up the trophy like, I did it, you know, and he's still sweaty. We go running downstairs. It was like out of a Rocky movie, you know what I mean? And when we were going back to San Bernardino, man, that story was resonating in my head. I knew that now that I had a son and we had put all this energy and blood, sweat, and tears into getting this trick, that I had to persevere and come home with that trick for my kid. That was my trophy, was landing the trick. Like I said, my dad hasn't been very involved or present in a lot of my life, but I carry him with me always, and I try to project all those like positive things that he left with me to my son now, because they were monumental, you know. So my relationship with my dad is good now, and I think it took me having a son again to learn to forgive from the other perspective, and I never really put myself in a father's shoes until I was one, and that was eye-opening. And instead of condemning him for, you know, all the things he didn't do, I started to really recognize all the things he did do. And it made me basically want to just forgive and salvage the time that we have left on this planet together. I love my dad dearly, I forgive him completely, and I'm just grateful to have him around to just be able to call and talk to. Yeah, otherwise my dad and my relationship is in a good place, and I'm happy about that. It makes my life as a father that much more enjoyable.
Yeah, Cairo, do you remember when me and your dad went down to a skate spot?
In San Bernardino when he went to LA?
Bernardino?
Yeah. He took like a big down thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What did you think about that?
It was pretty epic.
Yeah.
I like saying the word epic.
Yeah, man, shit. If I had to just give like some general advice, don't stop believing in yourself. Like, circumstances are circumstances, but they don't define you. And if you can think back on other people's stories, and if you can like find strength in other people's stories, and you can believe in yourself, I think that most people have the ability to overcome most things. I'm just gonna touch down on the name of these pieces because it's called True Grit. If I'm gonna be like truthful as to like where the grit stems from, it's just my family. I can't imagine, being blessed with being born in a better place, into a better family. When I think of grit, like my family's got grit, and I'm born into that, and that's like where I get my grit.